"What's the filling of the pie, Tiffany?" A short but very fat old woman named Maria asked the young woman named Tiffany. "There are several kinds of pie today, with eggs and onions, with mushrooms, with liver and potatoes, with cabbage, and with cherries," Tiffany replied calmly, adjusting her clean apron. She, like other women in the village, often sold her pastries outside the local store, which was located near the highway. The authorities planned to build a highway here and had even considered destroying the village, but to the great joy of the locals, this place had been declared a protected conservation area, and everything had been left as it was. The houses in the village, including Tiffany's house, were surrounded by the woods, and all drivers, including truck drivers, traveled that part of the way along the street, which was the widest in the village. But the drivers didn't mind this inconvenience at all, and were in a hurry to get to the village as soon as possible, for they could buy fresh vegetables, fruits, and berries, as well as honey, milk, sour cream, and delicious homemade pastries. Tiffany decided to keep up with her neighbors, and, because she was good at cooking, making pies, cookies, and buns, selling her homemade goodies to the hungry drivers and their passengers. Usually, everything was sold out in no time, but today, she had to stay there for almost 2 hours before the first customer showed up. Tiffany sold him some fresh pastries, smiled and wished him bon appetit, put the money in a carton, and only then noticed that she was almost alone by the roadside. Even Maria and her friend Valerie, who was selling dairy products, were already packing up to go home. They sold everything. "What about you, dear?" Valerie turned to Tiffany. "Are you going to spend the night here?" "No, of course not," the young woman replied. "I'm going to stay a little longer. Maybe I can sell some more. Valerie, please prepare 3 liters of milk for me. I'll come to you later and pick it up, but I can give you the money now." "Okay," she nodded in reply. "I'll pour it into a bottle and leave it by the gate." The 2 elderly women walked past Tiffany, talking quietly, but she could hear their words anyway. Probably it was very hard for her in the city, so she came back to the village. Yes, moreover, she came back with a baby. There's nothing to be surprised about. City boys are cunning. They use such naive fools, and when they find out about the pregnancy, they immediately kick them out. And then the girls immediately come back to their parents and apologize to them. That's right, and this young fool is no exception. Came back home and decided that her mother should take care of her baby. "I'm happy that my granddaughter, Alice, is not like that," Valerie said. "She grew up smart, graduated, got a good job in the city. I remember when she and Tiffany were good friends. They moved to the city together. Now Tiffany's at home, and my dear Alice is still living in the city, making a lot of money, about to get married. Not like Tiffany. Tiffany has only one talent, to have affairs with men." The distance muffled the old woman's disgusting words, but Tiffany realized what Valerie was saying and bit her lip. She didn't care what they thought of her. The gossip would never end. These old ladies were bored and needed to discuss someone. Tiffany thought of her mom, Anna. It was good that she was not like that and supported her daughter when she came back from the city, where she had lived for several years, with a baby in her arms. "That's okay, darling," she mumbled, looking at the baby's tiny face. "You and I are young and healthy. Both of us can work. We can raise a baby without anyone else's help. He'll be a handsome and clever boy." "Oh, Mommy," Tiffany snuggled against her mother's shoulder. "I have so much to tell you. I'll put Johnny to bed and come back to you." "Okay, sweetheart," Anna sighed. "Meanwhile, I'll make dinner for you and me." Then, both women were sitting in the kitchen, talking, thinking about how they would live their lives. They even cried a little. But tears can't solve the problem, so they just moved on with their lives and raising the baby. The locals gossiped about her and looked at her judgmentally, but she pretended as if she didn't notice this evil gossip. And no one knew, not even her dear mother, how often she couldn't sleep at night, thinking about her unfortunate life. The young woman's sad thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of a passenger bus heading into the city. The driver knew Tiffany well and stopped to buy some cookies from her, and the passengers immediately bought everything else from her. "Thank you, Tiffany," Keith thanked her. "If I wasn't married, I'd marry you just to eat these cookies every day." Come back tomorrow. I'll make your favorite plum pie. Tiffany waved her hand at him and laughed. Satisfied that she had instantly sold everything she had, she started to pack up to go home, when suddenly she saw a man walking out of the bushes onto the road. He had no clothes on and was wobbling so much that he could fall at any moment. Tiffany turned around to look for help, but the street was empty, and the village seemed almost extinct in the fading dusk. The man was getting closer. Tiffany shrieked in horror, grabbed her bags, and ran away. Stories of crazy maniacs who terrified different cities came to mind. Her house was very close, but suddenly she heard a begging cry for help, and she stopped. Tiffany turned around and saw that the man, having lost his last strength, had fallen helplessly to the ground face down. Then, mentally cursing herself for her carelessness, she hurried toward him and squatted down beside him. "What happened to you?" she asked, and tried to turn him over. She succeeded and immediately cried out loudly, "What? Is that you? It can't be!" The man didn't answer anything. He didn't seem to understand anything at all. Tiffany barely managed to help him get up. Fortunately, a man came out of the alley, and Tiffany recognized Frank, the local alcoholic. "Frank, please help," she shouted to him. When he ran up, she begged, "Help me get him home. See, he's severely injured." "Tiffany, can't we just call an ambulance and the police? And let him stay here the whole time? But you can't take a stranger home. I mean, there's your mother and your baby." "Frank, this is my ex-father-in-law, Ryan." Tiffany stomped her foot impatiently. "Are you going to help or not? Also, get some clothes. He shouldn't be naked." "Okay," Frank agreed, "but you owe me a bottle of alcohol." Passing drivers saw the strange people dragging along the roadside toward the houses, but no one stopped to help or even ask what was going on. They all had other things to do, and only Tiffany, who was sympathetic to other people's misfortune, couldn't leave this man in trouble, even though he'd caused her a lot of pain not so long ago. Together with Frank, she brought Ryan home and put him on the bed under the shrieks of her frightened mother. Then she gave Frank some money for alcohol, because she didn't keep any at home, and hurried to the phone to call an ambulance. Frank quickly brought clothes and helped Tiffany dress up her former father-in-law. "These are my personal belongings," Frank said, expecting to be rewarded. However, he knew Tiffany would reward him nicely, for she had never been greedy. She was always friendly and kind to everyone. Lying on the pillow, Ryan turned his head, not understanding where he was. Suddenly, his gaze focused on a cute little boy looking at him intently. "Hi," Ryan said in a hoarse voice. The child was frightened by the unfamiliar voice, and his mother immediately appeared beside him. "It's okay, dear, don't cry." "Tiffany?" Ryan only now recognized her. "What's wrong with me? And what are you doing here?" "I have no idea what happened to you, and I'm here because this is my home," Tiffany grinned. "So now you're the one who's my guest. Don't look at me like that. I'm not going to kick you out like you kicked me out not so long ago. The paramedics will be here in a moment. I guess they will take you to the hospital." "To the hospital," Ryan repeated and closed his eyes. It was very hard for him to speak, but the memories flashed through his aching head. He remembered the day when he and his wife Angela celebrated at the restaurant their first $1 million earned, and then they traveled to the ocean with their little son Connor. After that, they traveled abroad many times, but that first family trip stayed in his heart forever. Back then, Ryan still had free time for his wife and son, and then that time began to fly by too quickly. Ryan was fully immersed in his growing business. Angela was busy with her own activities, and their whole life was scheduled for many years ahead. The couple were sure that their son would marry the daughter of Ryan's partner, Monique. The beautiful, intelligent girl was a perfect match for Connor, but for some reason, he decided to do everything in his own way, and one day, he took Tiffany home and introduced her as his wife. Ryan and Angela froze in place, staring at the country girl with the thick braid and the cheap bag in her hands, while she smiled at them sincerely, not realizing that no one wanted her in the house. "Mom, Dad, are you going to keep us on the doorstep like this? Meet Tiffany, my wife," Connor grinned. What have you done, Connor? Ryan asked, holding Angela's hand, who staggered hearing this news. Nothing, just married the girl I love, not the one you chose for me. Tiffany and I met a few months ago, and she is the most wonderful girl in the world. Today, she and I officially became husband and wife. How's that? So you don't even bother to ask for our advice or even to inform us? What about Monique? Angela sobbed. Well, what's the big deal, Mom? I'm an adult and self-sufficient man. I make good money, and I'll be able to provide for my family. By the way, don't worry, we won't live here in your house. I'll rent an apartment for us. I just want you to know that I have Tiffany now. And about Monique, it was always you who liked her, not me. Tiffany, Ryan echoed. So, Tiffany, come in and tell us who you are and where you're from. I lived with my mom in a small but very beautiful village. I have no one but my mom. Now I have Connor. Where did you meet? Here in the city. I studied at the culinary college first. Then I worked in a cafe as a cook. That's where we met. How did that happen? Angela asked. We had a very funny meeting, Mom, Connor answered instead of Tiffany. I broke up with another girlfriend and got drunk. Then I got kicked out of this cafe and Tiffany picked me up. She thought I was homeless. Can you believe it? She took me to her apartment, put me to bed. Oh my God! Angela was shocked. She takes homeless people home and you married her? Mom, aren't you listening to me? Tiffany was kind to me. She helped me, Connor exclaimed. She's kind, and I married her because I knew you would talk me out of it and insist on marrying Monique. But I don't love her. She's stupid. But Tiffany is definitely smart. Angela couldn't cope with her nervousness. Why did you do this to us, Connor? Okay, son. Ryan stood up, placing both hands on the table. Tomorrow, I will handle your divorce. You can get divorced in 1 day. Connor, you will return to your normal life, and you, sweet girl, you will return to your very beautiful small village. We'll consider your marriage an ordinary misunderstanding and quickly forget about it. Dad, what on earth are you talking about? Connor stood up and looked his father in the eye. Nothing, son. You'll thank me later. Now, please walk this young lady out and come back home. Dad, I said let her get out of here. And you also have to choose between us, your family, and this, the sneaky, brazen girl. I choose her, Connor shouted, and taking Tiffany by the hand, ran out of the house. A year and a half passed, but Ryan and Angela never accepted Tiffany as a family member, and, although Connor visited them often, they asked him never to come to their house with Tiffany. They often tried to turn him against his wife, and gradually Connor began to think the same way, that Tiffany was not the girl of his dreams. She is calm, shy, and modest. He could say she was coy, but she didn't understand the social life he was used to. She didn't like nightclubs, restaurants, and other entertainment. Just watching a movie at home or a casual stroll through the city was enough for her. Tiffany liked museums and theaters, but Connor couldn't stand it all. He liked loud music, and he liked to have fun. The homemade food that had initially delighted him now seemed disgusting. I'm sick of your soups, pies, and meatballs. Why don't we order pizza? Have you forgotten that you don't live in the village? Stop cooking this disgusting crap. Disgusting, Tiffany said indignantly. Connor, I don't understand. What's going on? How can you say that? I'm great at cooking, and I'm trying to please you. You really don't understand anything, Connor yelled. I'm so sick of you. Tiffany wasn't used to being treated this way, so she raised her hand sharply and slapped her husband in the face. That's what I was talking about, he recoiled. Redneck. Turning around, he left the apartment, slamming the door loudly. Tiffany couldn't take it anymore and cried, then wrapped her arms around her belly. She never got the chance to tell her husband that she was expecting a baby. Several days passed. Connor never came back home, but the landlady showed up and demanded payment. Wait a minute, Mrs. Cooper. Tiffany rushed to her purse and pulled out all the money she had and held it out to the woman. But the woman took the money, counted it, and only wrinkled her nose grudgingly. But this is only for utilities, and only for 1 month. You haven't paid for 3 months. What do you mean, 3? Tiffany wondered. That's exactly what I mean. You haven't paid for the apartment in 3 months. Shameless. Why do you think I came here? Your husband Connor has been promising to pay the rent for 4 months now. You're no better than him. There must be some kind of mistake here. It can't be. I don't want to hear anything. It's time to pay. Give me the money. I don't have it. I gave you all the money I had, Tiffany said, embarrassed. Then get out of here. Pack your bags. You have a couple of hours. Is that clear? Mrs. Cooper yelled. Tiffany begged her to wait, saying she'd try to find the money. I'll figure something out, Tiffany assured her, and when Mrs. Cooper left, the girl quickly ran outside. Tiffany got to Ryan and Angela's house with difficulty. It was raining outside. They were both home and opened the door right away, but wouldn't let her into the house. Is Connor here? Tiffany asked. He's your husband, Angela replied sarcastically. How do we know where he is? It's time to pay the rent, Tiffany mumbled. I gave him my entire salary every month. He promised to pay, and now it turns out he hasn't. Honey, don't involve us in your problems, Ryan told her as he closed the door, and don't come here again. But I need to talk to Connor. Tiffany held the door open, not allowing them to close it. I'm expecting a baby. But they had already closed the door in front of her. She didn't even know if Connor's parents had heard what she said or not. The unhappy girl had no choice but to go back to the apartment. She had no idea what to say to the landlady. When she came, it turned out that Mrs. Cooper had already thrown Tiffany's belongings out the door and didn't want to listen to her. Tiffany went to the bus stop and stayed there all night, shivering and trying to save herself from the piercing wind and cold. In the morning, passerby noticed the girl lying on the bench and called an ambulance. Now, the ambulance was coming for Ryan. Tiffany sat beside him, wiping the abrasions and wounds on his face with a wet towel. Who hurt you so badly? She asked. Business. It happens, Ryan sighed. Competitors did their best. They dragged me into a car, drove me out into the woods, beat me up, forced me to take all my clothes off. They thought I'd freeze to death, but I survived. You'll be fine, Tiffany promised him. Soon the paramedics arrived and took Ryan to the hospital. Tiffany fed Johnny and put him to bed, and then spent a long time sitting with his mother, talking about what had happened. 3 weeks went by. Once, early in the morning, someone knocked on Tiffany's door. She opened it and saw her friend Alice on the doorstep. Tiffany, she mumbled and held out her arms to her. I came, Tiffany, I came. I've been waiting for you, Alice, Tiffany hugged her friend. Well, let's go. Will you show him to me? Sure. A moment later, they were both leaning over the crib where Johnny was sleeping. I'll never forget what you did for me, Alice cried softly. I was so scared when I gave birth to him. I didn't know how I was going to look people in the eye, and Jason didn't need me at all. That's what I thought. And now we've made up, and I told him everything. I told him about Johnny, too. We're going to be a real family now. Oh my gosh, Tiffany, I'm so glad we met at the hospital that day. Tiffany lowered her head sadly. Yes, she would never forget that day. She got a cold when she spent the night at the bus stop and got severe pneumonia. Doctors fought for her life and health for 3 weeks, but they couldn't save the baby. Connor never visited his wife, even though he had been informed what happened and where she was. After being discharged from the hospital, Tiffany went out to the hospital square and met Alice there. What are you doing here? She was surprised. They hadn't seen in a while. Are you sick or something? Already recovered, Alice said, and at that moment a nurse came up to them. So, she turned to Alice, are you really leaving? What about your son? He's crying all the time. He needs you. He's so tiny, so nice. Tiffany was shocked. Alice, I don't understand. You gave birth to a son? But why are you leaving? Alice burst into tears, complaining about life. You know what? Tiffany said confidently. Take the baby out of the hospital. Don't abandon him. After that, I'll take the baby and go with him to the village while you solve all your problems. You'll thank me later. Do whatever you want, Alice said gloomily. And now, as soon as he was awake, she held out her arms to him. My little baby, my son. Valerie came to Tiffany after Alice. Forgive me, Tiffany, for everything. I'm so sorry. I didn't know anything. I'm not mad at you, Tiffany smiled. Be happy. I'll be Johnny's godmother. Alice asked me about it. In the morning, New visitors arrived at Tiffany's house, Ryan and Connor. "We came to thank you for everything," Ryan smiled, "and we have one more thing to say." "Come back home, Tiffany," Ryan mumbled. "I'm home," Tiffany answered them. "Where am I supposed to come back to? Connor, we are already divorced. You're nothing to me. I'm sorry. Ryan, I have no resentment toward you, and I'm glad you're healthy again." "Wait, but you have a baby," Ryan began. "Little Johnny, my grandson." "That's my friend's son," Tiffany grinned sadly. "My baby is gone. My baby died the day you kicked me out of the house into the freezing cold." She didn't say anything else and went inside. Ryan and Connor stood at the gate for a long time, lowering their eyes. Several years passed. Tiffany got married to Jason's friend. Their families were very close now. Alice was raising Johnny and her little daughter, and Tiffany gave birth to a cute little boy, Mason. She was happy, just like everyone else who loved her.
"All right, everyone's presentations are done," Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me and began to speak. "There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only." "Absolutely right." His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. "I'm leaving." After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, is something wrong?" Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike! What have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that?" "Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here." "He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.